reason we think we ended up short on volunteer gifts, so we may go up there, don't pick anything. We were going with the regulars and saying, hey, we're sorry, we're short.
Did you find the list?
Yes, I got the list. You'll catch up later.
Put into the meeting.
So 24 minutes, and we got like 40.
You identify that one?
I know, when I look at the list,
No other tree out there like it.
okay.
And I deliberately took all the leaves
You're
off.
being recorded, so,
No, we're not recording yet.
yes. Who is recording you?
Well, you told me, I do what you like.
You started already. Okay. Yep. Yep.
Grubs are a summer thing, so you should start in like May and do it about, if you see grub activity, you'll see them. If you have a light on at night and the rooms are small, you should see them. No, it's kind of like a grasshopper grub old cricket season. Yes, ma'am. Get help. Good evening, everybody. I have been sick, so if I start coughing, I am not contagious. This is before. If you ever get flu A, it's terrible. And my aunt ended up in a hospital. I was lucky I didn't have to go to the hospital. So tonight I've had people ask me to show them how to do an air layer again. So we're going to, I don't know if you've seen it before, but it's going to be a repeat class for those that didn't. Some of you are new. Generally when I do propagation, I never have time to do the air layering, so it'll be new to probably most of you. But we're going to have a challenge first. I'm going to hold up a plant and see if you can identify it and tell me whether it's native, non-native, or invasive. So, let's start with an easy one. How many people know what this is?
Oak.
Evergreen fixes its own nitrogen. You can actually do harm by fertilizing it. It puts on a little berry called barberries, and it's used to make candles. For the scent of the barberry. Wax myrtle, who said that? Right, it's a wax myrtle. Great plant, a good bird plant, that especially when the warblers are down in the wintertime, when they put all the berries on, about a month or so from now, there'll be little gray looking berries all up and down the stem, and those birds go to town on that. Warblers love the wax myrtle. A great nesting area for cardinals, thrashers, mockingbirds, so it's a great plant to have. But do not fertilize it. You can do more damage to it because it fixes its own nitrogen in its root system. So it takes care of itself. If you establish it, you let her go. No, no. So wax myrtle.
Yes.
How many people know what this one is? Red berries. Oh, what is the wax myrtle? Is it native or non-native? Right. Okay. Who said that one? Brazilian pepper, correct. Invasive. Very, very, very invasive. It's a really nice looking shrub when it has the red berries, but the birds eat it, and then they fertilize it as they deposit it. In other words, they poop it out. But anyway, very, very invasive. So if you see this, and it's very distinctive on the leaf, it has 7 leaflets on its leaves, and they're alternating. One side, then another, then another, then another. So if you see them, cut them down to the ground, keep them cut back. They'll eventually die if you keep cutting them back, or pull them up when they're small. They're very easy to pull. You'll hear about pepper pulls. That's what you're pulling, is Brazilian pepper. Invasive. Oh, and by the way, that's non-native. Invasive automatically makes it non-native.
Sweet gum?
Anyone know what this one is?
Sweet gum?
Sweet gum. Sweet gum has 5 leaflets. Okay, so, and it is a larvae plant for the Luna moth. So it's a great tree to have. It is deciduous. You get a lot of leaves, beautiful spring growth. Kind of pain in the butt seed pods because they're really, really sharp if you step on them, but it's a hard pod with little thorny-like things coming all the way around it. But it's a great tree to have, but put it on a perimeter where you're not going to be walking every day, especially during seeding time. Native or non-native? Native. Native, correct. Eucalyptus, correct. Beautiful smell. They use this for making, you get oil from the berries. It's made in making a lot of medicines. Camphorphenique is made from the berries of this. But it is very invasive.
Not native.
Not native, correct. It's invasive, but it's everywhere. It's like the golden rain tree. You'll see these everywhere. And once you have them, you know why they're invasive, because you're constantly pulling up little seedlings. So, non-native, invasive. Mulberry, correct. Edible fruit, it is native. Deciduous, so it'll lose all the leaves. Great plant to have, can get lengthy. So if you can trim it while it's a younger tree to get more stability, then you'll be better off. It'll be a healthier tree for that, and you won't get those big lengthy branches that come down to the ground like that. You'll have to fight the birds for the berries, the mockingbirds, the thrashers, the cardinals, they all love these berries.
Woodpeckers love them too.
What's that?
Woodpeckers love them too.
Woodpeckers too, right. And if you have bears in the area, they'll eat them. Bears. Bears.
The other thing with that
Huh?
is don't plant it where it's gonna be, the berries are gonna fall on your car.
Right. Correct. They do have a very, very good stain.
Yeah.
Kind of a purpley black. I always had, where I work, Roxanne always knows if I got into mulberries because my fingers are black or purple looking. But she's okay with that because she gets the tall ones. She's this tall. I get the short ones. So we share. What about this one? Magnolia. Beautiful, beautiful, big, white, fragrant flowers. However, the pod,
Don't like
they're
it.
hard to step on too, and animals will carry them around. The squirrels eat them, a lot of birds eat them, raccoons will eat them, possums will eat them. So it is a good beneficial plant for wildlife, but I want to put it where you're going to walk. Native or non-native? Native, correct. Put that one for last. What about this one? Red maple. They have kind of a pinkish stem, 3 lobes on their leaf. Beautiful, beautiful cascading, I call them helicopter seeds, because it's a little pod with 2 little things on it, and they down when they fall out of the tree. Good beneficial plant. No problems with this, other than you'll get a lot of leaves in fall when they start dropping. But it's one of the most beautiful trees in the spring for the red seeds. They dangle in multiple seeds, and it has fall color also. Native or non-native? Native. I want to see who knows this one. It's sleeping right now. This is one of those plants that at night it closes up, but normally these are out.
Acacia.
There's 2 leaves. No? 2 leaves, and then these fold out. But right now it's sleeping.
Tamarind.
You think it's native or non-native? Non-native, correct. Powder puff. Powder puff. Beautiful little, puffy little flowers. There's a dwarf. It only gets, well, it's supposed to get about that high. I've got some that's 6 foot over on the water because they never freeze. This is a standard, so it's like 14 feet high and 14 feet wide. In my house, it would be 3 feet tall because it would freeze every year, but on the water, it doesn't freeze. Okay, we already told it. Now this one, I deliberately took off the leaves and everything, So, and see if anyone can identify it. It is a native.
Stick.
Stick. Is that what you said? Notice the branches, it jags back and forth. Okay, that should give you a hint. When it blooms, the flowers are along the stem.
Mellow.
Was that?
Mellow.
Nope. And it has heart-shaped leaves. Red. But I did that so that you can see where the stem actually jags back and forth. So I love red buds. Okay, so tonight we're going to do an air layer, but I'm going to teach you a couple of things about trees. What is the bark called? You know the scientific name for bark? Oh. Phloem.
What?
Phloem. It's the plant has 3 layers. Phloem, xylem, and cambium. Cambium is that thin layer between the wood and the bark. When you're doing an air layer, most of your best air layers that you can do is with a thin bark. Thin bark up in, various barks. But bark comes in many, many colors, many, many sizes, many, many forms. This is what do you think that is? Yeah, that is the dead giveaway. that's the heart of the tree. The tree has a heart. Every bud on a plant that breaks on its own is a lateral or a latent bud. Lateral is that it's part of the formation. Latent is it has to be encouraged. So if you tip the tree or an animal chews on the end, the latent buds will come out, but they're still attached to the heart. And in the tips of the trees, we have a chemical called auxins. And the auxin keeps the lateral buds from breaking until they need to break. Because the plant only can bring in so much food, and because it has to supply water to all those leaves and everything. So it's going to do it only when it needs to. So when there's damage, it will put out new branches. The latent buds will bloom and become a branch, or break and become a branch. And then it photosynthesizes by the sunlight coming into the leaf, carries it down to the root. The root transforms it into sugar, and it's brought back up to the tree. How do you think it gets back up? It's the same way it gets down, but how do you think that happens? Through the bark. So your xylem or your wood is, well, it comes through the leaves first, but then it goes into the phloem. So your xylem is the structure of a tree. It holds the tree up and it anchors the tree. So your wood has a job. The phloem also has a job. Protection of the wood, so it covers up the outside. Animals climbing, something chewing on it, kids carving their initials in it, all that. The phloem tries to protect the tree. It also carries the sugars down to the roots. And when the roots, it develops the food, it brings it back up to the leaves. It also brings water up to the plant. So the phloem has a job too. But the most important job on a tree is the cambium. That very thin layer between the wood and the bark is called cambium. When there's a wound or a pruning cut, the cambium will form a chemical called toxins that seals the area around the cut. Then the cambium starts to divide. The cells divide and divide and divide, and they cover a wound. Good one. Okay, you can see on this cut here, all this is cambium growth, and it covered that like a scar. Okay, the plant itself, the tree itself will do a thing called departmentalizing. It will the xylem rays will put out a chemical to block where the wound is. The annual rays will put out a chemical to block where the wound is, and then the cambium will heal it. If it's a proper cut, you'll get a heal like that. If it's a not proper cut, you'll get a heal or you won't get a heal. You can see where this was a bad cut. Always cut outside the ridge, and they had the ridge part, but they were inside the collar. This is the collar. Okay, so this cut should have been back here. If they would have done that, the cambium could have healed this wound before the disease set in. So it's rotting because it was an improper cut. So ridge, collar, clean cut. Cambium will take over. So all that happens at once, and it heals. But there's different types of bark, and I wanted to talk about them. We said that was a cedar, and that was correct. Does anyone know what this one is? Oak. Oak has corky bark. So the phloem will keep forming as the plant grows, and it builds on to the outer bark. As the tree gets older, if you look at the new growth, it's a smooth trunk, smooth bark on the new branches. But if you look at the trunk, it's very, very corky. So that's its protection. So it just builds onto the cork. What about this one? No, that's right. That was a funny shaped branch because there's a ridge. Anyway, this is also an oak, but this is a laurel oak. Laurel oak doesn't get as corky as your live oaks. And you can go out and identify trees when they don't have any leaves on just by knowing your barks. So that's the laurel oak. Then there's the flaky barks. What do you think this is? Pine tree. And the bark keeps building on, and it comes off with animals running up with the wind and everything, but it keeps building on to the outer edge. And this one? This is a beautiful blooming non-native plant, but I love the bark. No. It's clusters of bottle brush looking thingies. Because it's a bottle brush, right? And you can see that this is a corky bark, but it adapts as it grows. Where if you look up later on, if you look close to it, you'll see where the bark is actually split, and it healed, the cambium healed the split. So that happens as a tree grows. Your bark can only do so much. Then you have branches that smooth bark. Smooth bark plants do not build onto their bark. They exfoliate. So that's why you get a pattern on your, this is a crepe myrtle, but our sycamore do it, or the pears. There's a number of trees, elm trees will do it, and you get different coloration in the bark, which is very good. It's a good, nice characteristic. But the bark doesn't add on. So this is called exfoliation. You don't know how many times people bring in the spring when it starts to do it, because that's when the tree grows and the old bark's too tight, and it has to develop a new bark. So as this flakes off, the new bark is rebuilt underneath. And generally a different color. But when you're doing air layers, your best air layers are going to be smooth bark trees. You can do the others, but it's going to take a longer time for the rooting to happen. So what is an air layer? An air layer is a form of reproduction. And generally you don't do an air layer the way I'm going to do it tonight, but I wanted to make sure you can see it. Normally you would do a lateral branch off of a plant that you want, and those branches might be along the bottom and you want to get rid of them, but instead of getting rid of them, you can propagate them by doing an air layer. So what you would do with an air layer is, this will survive, by the way. So what I'm going to do is take off this branch, and I'm going to put my air layer right here. Don't do this at home. You do a lateral branch. But because I wanted you to see it, I wanted you to be able to see it so that you can understand it. You do the, where a leaf comes out on a plant is called a node. So each place where a leaf comes out is a node, and you want to do your air layer in between those nodes. So you want to do the wood. You don't want to include where a leaf was. So you're going to cut all the way around. All the way around.
You say you don't want a node to be part of it.
Huh?
You don't want a node to be part of it.
No, you don't. And then you go about 2 inches. Depends, you can do them bigger. I've actually done camellias that were 6 foot tall. And in 3 months, I had a 6 foot tall camellia. Where if I would have done a seedling, I would have been waiting 10 years to have a 6 foot tall camellia. So it's speeding up your reproduction. Then gotta take all that phloem, or the bark off, and go down to pure wood. So you just carve it out. Do not leave green on your plant.
All the way around.
All the way around. You're
Are
actually
you
severing.
taking- Are you taking the cambium away?
I'm taking the cambium, everything. I'm going all the way down to the xylem. All the way down to the wood. Now, if I do nothing more, you think this is gonna live?
No.
No, because it has no more attachment to its roots. What does it get from the roots? Water and food.
Yeah, but it'll grow power over there for that.
If you don't get all the wood out. If you leave green on there, you leave any part of that cambium. So what I normally do after I cut it open, I actually scrape it out. Until there's no sign of any green at all. So I've got in this case, pure white wood. All right, so now, if I left it like this would die, this would live. But, in order to do an air layer, I want roots here. So to get roots there, I've got to do a couple things. I'm going to take the place of the roots at this point. So I'm going to take a piece of foil, and I usually fold it over a little bit like that, with the fold at the top. Then I'm going to take a piece of saran wrap, and I lost my box, so I don't know how I'm going to cut this, but, yeah. Handy dandy razor knife. I don't want it to come out. Yeah. I'm going to lose the top. Okay, the reason you're using the plastic is to keep the moisture inside this little bed we're making. Lay that plastic right down inside of the foil. So what you're going to have is, see how it's lined with the plastic? Then you're going to take some stuff called sphagnum moss, also known as, in Home Depot, orchid moss. This is a high-grade sphagnum moss. You can buy it in the bag, but they didn't have any. So I got the orchid moss, and I soaked it in water. Soak it in water the day before. You want it nice and wet. So this is becoming your attachment to the roots. So you take the sphagnum moss, and you fill in your little foil thing in here. Okay? Then what I'm going to do is wrap it around this area here. And you want it nice and wet. Make sure that you're covering the upper part, very critical, and the bottom. Take a wire or something and really secure it, because if it slides and it doesn't stay on that upper part, the roots can't form. So you want to make sure that it can stay where you put it, so it's staying on your cut. Does anyone see a problem with foil on a plant? There's two. If it dries out, your job is to keep it wet. So you're going to be putting water in the top. So you make sure the bottom's tight up against the trunk and secured. So ants is one. If it dries out, the ants will come up in there and they'll make a nice little nest in there. You want to make sure that the top stays open. So you want to kind of crimp it just below the top and put a wire around that.
So you're gonna pour water inside there once in a while?
Yes, you don't want it to go dry. So if you've got irrigation, you don't have to worry about it. If you don't have irrigation and it's rainy season, you don't have to worry about it. Generally, you would do this in February, March. The plant will be more vigorous, and you would actually have a better chance of getting it to take. And then you make sure that top is open. A very, very important thing, and I didn't have the right tag, but I am going to tag it, is to make sure you tag it not only with the name of the plant, but with the date. Especially if you do them every few, like in February and March, and you can even go into April. You want to make sure that you tag it with the date, because about 3 months from now, depending on the plant, on a tree you're about 3 months. So you have more herbaceous, which is more plants that don't turn woody, it's a little less. So you want to tag that. You have it here, make sure it doesn't dry out, so you just pour water in there. I usually have a bottle of water, and I'll go by and just, depending on how dry it is, I put it in until I see it coming out the bottom. Sphagnum moss holds 80% water, so it's a great purpose for this. So it's taking the place of the bark. Now what's going to happen is where we made that bottom cut, it's going to form roots. And those roots are going to root out into this medium. And when you see little roots coming out the bottom, then you're going to take it off. Now where you take it off at, don't disturb this. You want to take it off right above a branch or a node, because this can carry on living. If you're doing it on a side branch, you take it off where you made your little bottom cut, and then you take that branch all the way back to the trunk or to another existing branch, because you don't want to leave a nub, because that'll just rot and cause diseases. But you want to get the air layer off, put it in a pot, and leave it in a pot another 3 to 4 months, and you can plant them in the spring. I usually plant mine the following spring. I put them in a 1 gallon pot, unless they're 6 foot tall, I put those in 3 gallon pots. But I literally have had, to me, is this tall and this wide at the top that I air layered. So it's nice to try it. It doesn't cost all that much to do it. The trick is disciplining yourself enough to keep that water in there. So that's a form of propagation. If you see a plant in not in a forest or a state woods, maybe down the road or something, or maybe your neighbor has one and they'll let you go air layer it, you can actually air layer it. This knife is not quite. And go back and check it all the time.
Barbara,
How about if you're,
you put plastic, you wrap it in plastic, and then you put tin foil around it?
Well, I put the foil down, put the plastic in, add the sphagnum, and then I just pick it up and put it on there. Yes, it's foil, plastic, and then the sphagnum. But when you're taking this off, you don't plant it with the foil on it. You carefully pull downward, because your roots are going to be going this way. You don't want to pull up because you're going to damage the roots. Pull it down, fill your pot halfway, put this into where the top, where the roots are forming, will be the surface of your pot. So you hold it there and just add soil to it and water it in. Do not pack it, because these roots are going to be white and very, very tender.
You can say you take the tin foil off, and you can see the roots under the
Yep.
plastic, and when it's ready.
Yeah, the plastic and the foil comes off.
Yeah.
This is just to hold it there to keep the sphagnum on it.
Yeah, well, the foil's there to keep roots don't grow light, grow dark.
Right, so the other problem with putting foil on a plant is the mockingbird and the blue jay. They love to pick on it. So, some people actually put a dark cloth around it on the outside of the foil so that the birds will leave it alone. So that is an issue. Ants, if it dries out, birds if they want to play with the shiny stuff.
how about if it's a sunny location? You do
Well, the
everything
water
to
would be
keep
more
the
critical. You
sun
can still
from
do that,
drying
but the
out.
water would be more critical. So you have to make sure that you check it. This, on a regular day like this cool, but you're not gonna get that cool. Well, you can start them in February, you're gonna still be a little bit cool. But as this spring comes and it gets sunnier and hotter, it's critical you keep that water in there. So this is the replacement for the phloem, and the tree's gonna form the roots. Cut it off, peel it back, pot it up, let it stay in a pot. And sometimes when you put this big old bulky, heavy, it's heavy for a branch, especially if you're doing a lateral branch. Sometimes you may have to put a bamboo stake to hold it upright. Because if it falls over, the water's gonna drip out, you're gonna have issue getting water in it. So sometimes you may need to stake it while it's on the tree, on your plant.
Barbara, let me ask you something, just playing devil's advocate. If you're doing this on a lateral branch, do you do it only on one, or can you do it on multiple branches? Or
Depending on the
is
size of your plant, we generally On the communities, we did no more than 3, but we were doing some big cutting. So on a plant, I'd say 5 foot tall, you could probably put 2 or 3. But you don't want to deform your plant.
Right,
So you want to make sure you select the branch that you would normally prune out. So generally they're along the bottom area rather than up on the top of your plant. Because you'll be taking away from the canopy and the form of your plant.
right.
So,
If your plant has a central leader, you don't want to be.
right, you don't want to do this. You don't want to do what I just did, but I only did it so you can see it.
But if
Right.
you've got a plant that branches irregularly, then you can take a side branch off or whatever.
Right.
So, yeah, you always want to preserve your central leader on a tree that has central leader. We used to air layer lychees all the time, so we take them.
Yeah, they do it a lot on fruit trees.
Hang down here or do something else. The branches we want to keep, we go in air layer, we take the branches that are in the way or crossing or whatever, and air layer the extra branches we really didn't want. Instead of pruning them, we air layer them, and that did the same thing, essentially.
Hey, how was that? We got 1 minute. Yes, ma'am.
About how long does it take for the roots to grow up?
It depends on the plant, and it depends on the time of year. I've been told February, March. Steve, February, March for air layer?
You want to do it when it's warm, okay?
So
Because
March would be better?
that's when roots are forming better, especially up here, you've got a chance the roots will freeze.
Yeah.
So you don't want to do it during freezing weather.
Yeah, because it's up in the air now, so it's going to be more
Right.
exposed.
So, you know, I never would do it in the winter time.
Nor the summer because it's too hot.
Well, it really wasn't an issue.
Yeah.
We do, I mean, you first of all, you do branches in the shade, and you're gonna wrap the plastic in tinfoil, which is gonna keep it cool
Yeah, that's true.
and dark, so that isn't really an issue. Sometimes when there's heavy rains, you get water running down the branches, and it can water along your air layer, which isn't too great.
Right.
So sometimes it's better not to do it during the rainy season. But it just kind of depends on the plants. Most plants are going to be more receptive to rooting probably spring and summer than some of these
Fall and winter, yeah.
maybe. But anyway, because up here we have freezing temperatures, you don't want to do it in the winter time because the roots will freeze before the tree will.
I asked a nurseryman one time, so when's the best time to do an air layer? And he said when his knife is sharp. So I guess he does it whenever he wants to.
The one thing with air layers you gotta be real careful on, we should went over this, is that you gotta scrape that foam layer completely off, because if you don't, it will heal up,
Yep.
and then you'll never have any incentive to root. It only will root if that foam layer is
No,
set.
it'll actually heal over. The cambium will actually form a bridge back to the tree, to the trunk, to the root part. To
And
the
some
bottom.
of it, if you know your plant, some of them you have to really, like, when you did leaches, you had to scrape them really hard because you think you got it all off and you didn't. And you come back 3 months later, it's just healed over, and you got the roots, so.
So when you do your air layer, scrape it off, do a couple more, and come back to this, because if you didn't get it all, it'll get a little bit darker with the cambium still there on the trunk, on the wood.
Yeah, you aren't gonna hurt it by
No,
scraping it
yeah,
down a
you're
little-
taking-
little
getting
deeper
rid of that
because
part anyway.
The xylem is deep enough, it's gonna still pick
Right.
up the water.
Yes,
During the time while it's rooting, and that might take weeks or even
It would take months.
will you expect to see some leaf drop or effect on the outer
if you
branch?
keep the water in there, you shouldn't.
So it'll actually get enough nutrients and stay green?
It doesn't need the nutrients because now I've told this plant, instead of growing, I told it to put on roots. A plant has what's called a source sink. If it's blooming, the flowers are the source of the energy. If it's newly planted, the roots are the source of the energy. So the plant's going to go to where it needs to go. If it's been pruned, the pruning cut is the source of its energy. So I've severed it, and now it needs roots. So it's going to produce those roots.
Then, when the plants drop leaves is when you sever them from the branches. So when you take your air layer off, a lot of times it's best to
Transplant
thin out some of those leaves, because those roots are never gonna be as good as that initial connection is. And it's good to keep them in the shade and mist them frequently initially to start with, because a oftentimes you'll see they'll go into shock, or they'll turn brown and other things, and they, so
Yeah.
that's, the toughest time for them is when, initially, when you've just taken it off. That's when you see the most response on the plant, because oftentimes that root system isn't that strong.
Yeah, and be very careful when you're taking that foil off, because if you damage those roots, it's reducing what it's used to having now in this little bundle. Any more questions?
So Barbara, then when you're taking that off, just leave the moss and everything there and plant it with the
No,
moss
you
on?
cut it off from the plant,
Right,
unwire it first, cut it off, and then carefully take the foil and plastic off.
right, but leave this, the
Leave the
moss.
sphagnum on there, because it'll have roots all in that,
Right, so just.
if your
go
air
right-
layer took.
Well, what I would usually do is, you've got that stuff in there that's gonna die anyway. So I kind of spread those roots at the bottom to make a cone, and reach in there and cut that stub off as high as I
Right.
could, and then put it in the ground.
Gotcha,
Yeah, because you're cutting at the top, or the bottom cut on here when you're removing it. So
right,
you do have a little stem that is rotting.
right,
So if you leave it on, and it'll form roots, and it can live on here for a number of months, but eventually that stem's gonna break off, and then this will be sitting on the ground.
right, okay,
So getting that stem out, you can open it from the bottom, but gently,
right.
and cut that stub off.
Got it.
Any more questions? Yes?
I do air layering the easier way. I do my azaleas, when they get long branches, I just let them hang out for a rock or a branch on top.
Okay, that's called layering. When you do that, you're layering.
Yeah, ground layer.
That's a ground layering.
Oh.
So this is an air layering, that's a ground layering. What she's saying is a flexible branch or a pliable branch, you just bring it on down. Azalea is
Great,
very herbaceous. It will root anywhere,
really?
anywhere on that stem. So what you normally do, if it's not a herbaceous plant, is you take that stem and you find out where it's going to make an attachment to the ground. And you, on the bottom side, just scrape in between two of those nodes. Then put a weight on it. You can use pins. These are turf pins. You can use these pins. I usually use 2 and do about a 5 or 6 inch area. It has to stay in contact with the soil. So you're gonna make a little shallow, cut that bottom, put it down on the ground, pin it down, or just get a little rock and lay it on top of the stem. And what's gonna happen is, I normally do it at the end of that branch that's coming down, so I only have about 5 or 6 inches coming out of the other side of the wood, or the stake, or the rock. And when it starts to root, that plant's gonna come on up and start growing. When it starts to grow, you just cut it right behind, let that branch go back up, and take that, you have to dig it up like a transplant, and put it in a pot or move it to another location. But don't bury it any deeper than it is rooted. Okay?
For a ground layering like that, do you also scrape all the way down to the root?
No, just one side,
Just one
the
side?
bottom side,
How much?
just an inch or so.
Oh, I know, but how deep?
Just through the cambium,
Just through the cambium?
yeah.
And sometimes people will notch the stem over there or do something else, but yeah. And the things that root really well, you don't even have to do much of anything, you just peg them to the ground, they root on their own.
I know some plants you just hold on the ground and stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, there's plants that, there's some plants you can trim and just lay on the ground with irrigation. Oh, we're right there, the trimmings.
I've done that with vines.
Yeah,
and-
vines are usually when you use layer. You can do a pliable branch. Roses, the old-fashioned roses, I've actually taken a rose, let it get the whips, and brought that whip down and planted it like an arch. So it was like a 12-foot whip. Rooted it. When that plant grew, I took the next whip and I actually made a fence with like this. It was pretty cool. Okay, if there's no questions, then we're done.
All right, we got about